My name is Rebecca Miles. Most people call me Becca. I am 30 years old and an infrastructure engineer specializing in sustainable transit systems. Until recently, I lived in the heart of Eugene, Oregon, where traffic lights blinked past midnight and the scent of coffee and asphalt filled every block. My life had been a blur of project deadlines, construction site visits, and late-night Zoom meetings with clients on both coasts. But 3 months ago, I crashed. Not literally, but mentally. After working 80 hours a week for 2 years straight, something snapped inside me. One morning, I stared at my laptop for 3 hours without typing a word. I closed the lid and walked away. My doctor called it burnout. My manager called it a sabbatical. I called it a chance to breathe. So I packed a duffel bag, emailed HR about taking my unpaid leave, and drove 6 hours south to a small town near Mendocino, California, where my grandmother lives alone in a wooden farmhouse just beyond the edge of the redwoods. Her name is Esther Miles. She is 76 years old. She lost her husband when she was 34 in a construction site accident that took the lives of 4 men. One of them was my grandfather. Since then, she has lived quietly raising 2 children and never remarrying. I remember visiting her house as a child. It always smelled like firewood and rosemary. There was a creek out back and an old tire swing that hung from a crooked oak. The farmhouse is modest with creaky floors and walls that whisper when the wind shifts, yet it feels like the only place in the world where time dares to slow down. Returning here after all these years was like stepping out of the noise and into memory. Grandma Esther welcomed me with a warm smile and a quilted blanket she had sewn 30 years ago. She told me I looked pale and too thin. She made cornbread and black-eyed pea stew every morning since we drink tea on the porch and talk about nothing and everything. In her presence, the panic that once gripped my chest feels distant. But beneath this peaceful routine, I started noticing something that troubled me. There were no phone calls from my parents, no birthday cards, no check-ins from my sister Melissa. My mother, Carolyn Miles, is a high-profile real estate broker in San Francisco. Always dressed in pastel blazers and nude heels, she measures worth by square footage in social circles. My father, Ronald, owns a marketing agency and believes the best conversations happen in boardrooms. Melissa is 27, a full-time influencer who just got engaged to the son of a city planner in Napa. Their engagement party was a headline in one of those glossy lifestyle blogs. And yet none of them had visited Grandma in over 2 years. When I asked Grandma about it, she simply smiled and said, "They are busy people, Becca. I don't expect anything." But I did. I expected more than silence. One afternoon, while helping her prune tomato vines in the backyard, I asked Grandma, "Do you hear from Mom often?" She wiped her hands on her apron and said gently, "Not really. Maybe Christmas. Maybe not." My heart sank. I knew my mother could be cold, but this felt like something deeper. A deliberate forgetting, a rewriting of the past to remove the woman who made their lives possible. I started wondering what had caused such distance, what had hardened my mother's heart against her own mother. And then one evening I got a message from the family group chat that left me stunned. "We're having a family planning meeting this Sunday in Napa to finalize details for Melissa's wedding. Please dress appropriately and arrive by 5. There was no mention of Grandma, not a word. Kaio, as if she didn't exist. I stared at the group message for a long time, rereading it until the words blurred together. No mention of Grandma, no separate text, no polite excuse like she is resting or travel might be difficult. Nothing. I showed the message to her that night, half hoping she would shrug it off, but I noticed the way her eyes lingered on the screen for a second too long. She handed the phone back with a gentle smile and said, "Maybe they forgot to include me." I nodded, but inside, something was boiling. Forgot. No. They excluded her. There was no mistake. I paced the porch for hours that night, unable to sleep, haunted by the image of Grandma sipping tea alone, while her family toasted to another generation without her. The next day, I called my mother. She picked up on the third ring, her voice clipped and busy. "Becca, I'm in between showings. Can this wait?" I kept my tone calm. I just had a question. "Is Grandma invited to the wedding planning meeting?" A pause followed. Then a cold answer. "Rebecca, she's not coming. This event is for immediate family and planning staff. We can't have distractions." I held my breath. Distractions. She's your mother. She's Melissa's grandmother. My mother's voice sharpened. She's a rustic widow, Becca. She doesn't belong in these kinds of events. Her presence would be awkward. We're trying to host a high-profile guest list, not a country fair. My hands clenched around the phone. That's disgusting, Carolyn exhaled. Don't be dramatic. Just be there on time and please don't stir things up. She hung up before I could say another word. I stood on the porch staring at the fading sky, trying to make sense of the words I just heard. Rustic widow. Doesn't belong. I looked at Grandma, who was folding laundry inside the house, humming softly to herself. How had the woman who raised my mother become someone disposable? The next day, I made a decision. I told Grandma we were going on a drive. She didn't ask many questions. She put on her best floral dress and tied her white hair in a neat bun. In the car, she asked once, "Where are we going?" And I simply said to the meeting. She didn't reply, but I saw the way her fingers pressed gently into her lap. The meeting was held at a luxury rental home overlooking Napa Valley. Melissa's fiancé's family had rented it for the weekend to celebrate the upcoming wedding and finalize the guest list decor and press arrangements. When we arrived, I helped Grandma out of the car and guided her up the stone path to the front door. The house shimmered with gold and white floral arrangements. Through the windows, I could already see people gathering with champagne flutes and gift bags. I knocked. The door opened. My mother stood in a cream silk blouse, her eyes instantly narrowing when she saw us. "What is this?" she said, her voice tense. I smiled politely. "I brought Grandma. She deserves to be here." My mother didn't move. She glanced behind her, then stepped outside, shutting the door halfway. "This is not the time, Becca. You're making a scene." I kept my voice low but firm. "No, you made a scene when you erased her from the invitation list. We're going in. You can either accept that or watch me walk in anyway." My mother's jaw clenched, but she stepped aside. "Fine," she hissed. "Do not embarrass us." We walked in together. Conversations slowed. A few heads turned. Melissa stood near the buffet line in a pastel dress, her eyes wide with surprise. Dad was sipping wine at the back, barely concealing his confusion. The room suddenly felt too polished, too bright, too cold. Grandma held my arm gently, her steps steady but slow. I guided her to a small couch in the corner and sat beside her. No one approached us. The meeting began with light chatter about floral vendors and photographers. Grandma sat silently nodding when I whispered small translations of what was being said. She didn't interrupt, until someone mentioned the importance of keeping the event intimate to reflect the family's refined image. That was when Grandma finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear. "When I married my husband, we only had 3 guests and 1 borrowed veil, but it was filled with joy. Maybe simplicity is still something to be proud of." The entire room froze. My mother's mouth twisted into a sharp smile. "Esther, she said your time was decades ago. We appreciate your sentiment, but this is a different era." My father chuckled lightly and added, "You wouldn't enjoy this kind of thing anyway. The caterers are all foreign cuisines." Laughter rippled through the room. Melissa looked away, pretending to scroll through her phone. Grandma lowered her eyes. My chest burned. I stood up slowly, the wooden chair creaking under me. "Enough," I said, my voice trembling but rising. Everyone looked at me. I said, "This is enough. This woman built everything you're standing on. She raised 2 children by herself while working night shifts. She paid for college, for this family. And you treat her like an antique." My mother glared at me. "Sit down, Becca. Do not ruin this for Melissa." I didn't move. I turned to Melissa. "You want to walk down the aisle like a princess, then learn respect, because you're spitting on the very hands that fed you." Grandma touched my arm gently. "It's all right, Becca." I shook my head. "No, Grandma. It's not. We're leaving." I helped her up, and as we reached the door, I turned once more. "If she's not invited to the wedding, I won't be there either." The room stayed silent as the door clicked behind us. We drove back in silence, the only sound coming from the tires on the asphalt and the wind brushing past the windows. Grandma sat beside me looking out at the vineyards as if searching for something far older than memory. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, but I saw the way her knuckles trembled ever so slightly. I wanted to say something to make it better to undo the damage my family had just inflicted, but I knew there were no words that could soothe what had just happened. That night, neither of us said much. I made tea. She lit the fireplace. We sat in the flickering light as shadows danced along the wooden floorboards. I went to bed early but couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way they laughed, the way no one stood up for her, the way even Melissa stayed quiet. 2 days later, something happened. Something that changed everything. It was late afternoon, and I was outside watering the vegetable beds when I heard the phone ring through the open kitchen window. Grandma picked it up as usual with a soft hello. I continued watering until I heard her voice change. A pause. Then she said, "Oh, Dana, dear, how lovely to hear from you." My hands froze. Dana. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I walked inside, quietly curious. I didn't want to interrupt, but something about Grandma's tone had shifted from casual to careful. "Yes, the luncheon is still on next week, isn't it?" I heard her say. "Wonderful. And no need to send a car, I'll make my way there." My heart began to beat faster. Grandma rarely went anywhere beyond the farmer's market. A luncheon with someone named Dana. Who was she? Grandma ended the call and turned to see me standing there with a questioning look. She smiled warmly. "That was Dana Lefebvre. She manages some of my investments." I blinked. Dana Lefebvre, the same Dana who was the CEO of Summit Capital, the Dana who regularly appeared on business shows and Forbes lists. That Dana. "Wait," I said, trying to stay calm. "You have investments." She chuckled as if I had just asked whether she still baked cookies. "Of course, dear. Doesn't everyone?" I sat down across from her, unable to process what I was hearing. Investments with Summit Capital. A luncheon invitation from one of the most powerful women in California. "Grandma, you need to explain this to me." Her eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and restraint. "Sit down, Rebecca. It's time I told you a story I thought I would never need to tell." She poured 2 cups of tea and began. "After your grandfather died, I had 2 choices: cry or carry on. I did both. I took a job sewing garments during the day and baking pies at night. It paid the bills, but it wasn't enough. One day, someone told me about a foreclosed property near town. I used all my savings and bought it, fixed the roof myself, cleaned every inch, and I rented it. A year later, I bought another, then another." My jaw dropped. "You built a portfolio." She nodded. "Over time, yes. Quietly. No one asked. I didn't boast. I used the income to pay for your mother's college, for your uncle's first business loan. I stayed quiet because I never wanted to wave money around. That was never the point." I stared at her stunned. "And Dana. She was a junior analyst at the time. She believed in affordable housing. I gave her her first block of units to manage. Now she's CEO and insists on keeping me as her personal client." I leaned back, speechless. My grandmother, the woman my family dismissed as outdated and poor, was in fact a quiet powerhouse behind one of the largest real estate portfolios in the state. "They don't know, do they?" I asked. "My parents." "Melissa." She shook her head. "They never cared to ask. I stopped telling them when they stopped listening." I felt a mixture of pride and fury swelling in my chest. All those years of dismissive glances, of birthday gifts mailed instead of delivered, all built on ignorance. Grandma took my hand. "I didn't do it for praise, Becca. I did it so you'd have a foundation to stand on, so Melissa could go to private school, so your mother could open her firm. I know they forgot me, but I never forgot them." I was shaking now, not from anger, but from something deeper. "You're incredible, Grandma, and I swear I will never let them treat you like that again." She smiled and reached over to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "I know, dear, and that's why I'm telling you now, because I think we have a luncheon to attend and some truths to reveal." I nodded slowly, my mind already racing ahead. This wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. Dana Lefebvre had invited Grandma to a high-profile executive lunch in Napa Valley, the same city where Melissa's wedding would be held. The same weekend, I checked the calendar, confirmed the time, and began making plans. This time, we wouldn't walk into a room to be dismissed. This time, they would see her for who she truly was. Not a burden, not a relic, but the woman who built the very stage they stood on. Grandma excused herself to her room. I sat at the table staring into my tea, unable to stop the rising anticipation in my chest. 2 days ago, I walked her out of a room where she was humiliated. In 5 days, she would walk back into another where she would be honored. And this time, I would be beside her every step. The morning of the luncheon arrived wrapped in golden light and early summer warmth. I had laid out Grandma's soft gray suit, the one she wore to weddings and funerals, but that day it looked regal. She wore a brooch shaped like a magnolia, her favorite flower, and a simple pearl necklace that had once belonged to her mother. I dressed in a navy blazer and slacks, nothing too flashy but enough to look professional beside her. As we drove to Napa, the roads curled along the vineyards like ribbons trailing across the hills. Grandma sat beside me, calm and quiet, but there was something different in her posture. She no longer looked like the fragile widow I had walked out of the wedding meeting with. She looked like someone returning to her rightful place. We arrived at the estate, a sleek glass and stone venue reserved for Summit Capital's private events. The parking lot shimmered with luxury cars, but we parked Grandma's modest sedan in the shade and stepped out with purpose. As soon as we entered, I saw her. Dana Lefebvre, tall, poised, dressed in a sharp burgundy suit, crossed the room in confident strides. Her face lit up when she saw Grandma. "Mrs. Esther," she said warmly, "you came." Grandma smiled and reached for Dana's hand. "You asked, dear. Of course I came." Dana turned to the gathering of about 40 guests and raised her voice just enough to catch their attention. "Everyone, this is Esther Miles, one of our founding investors and a woman whose belief in our mission made all of this possible. She is the reason I am standing here today." The room broke into polite applause, but I saw something more genuine in many faces: curiosity, admiration, surprise. Dana guided us to a table near the front set with white linens and crystal water glasses. Around us, business leaders mingled, marketing directors exchanged cards, and startup founders clutched investor packets. But the center of gravity was Grandma. Throughout the meal, people came to introduce themselves, shaking her hand, asking her about her journey. She answered with humility and warmth, never revealing the full scale of her success, but enough to inspire. I watched quietly, amazed at how easily she belonged in this world, how naturally she carried herself, and how wrong my family had been. But fate has a sense of timing. Halfway through dessert, the door opened and in walked Carolyn, Melissa, and my father Ronald. I froze, my fork suspended in midair. "What are they doing here?" I whispered. Dana leaned over and said they were invited by one of our board members as a gesture. "They don't know you're here." I stared as my family entered, scanning the room until their eyes landed on us. On Grandma. On me. My mother's face stiffened. My father blinked in disbelief. Melissa tilted her head like a cat, trying to understand a sound. Dana stood and crossed the room to greet them. "Carolyn, welcome. I'm glad you could join us. Please meet someone special." She led them to our table and said warmly, "This is Esther Miles." My mother opened her mouth, then shut it. Finally, she whispered, "Mom." Dana looked confused. "You two know each other." Ronald cleared his throat. "That's our mother. My wife's mother, Melissa's grandmother." Dana's brows rose. She turned to Grandma and then to us. "I had no idea." "I'm sorry, Esther, I didn't realize." Grandma gave a soft laugh. "No reason to apologize, dear. They rarely mention me." Dana's smile faded and she looked back at my mother. "Then it's time someone did." I heard a sharp intake of breath from Carolyn. She looked at me pleading, but I said nothing. Dana turned to the room and lifted her champagne glass. "Friends, today, we're honored by the presence of a woman whose quiet strength and investment in our company shaped our future. She didn't need applause or headlines. She simply believed in us. Esther Miles, a thank you." The room erupted in applause, this time louder and longer. Grandma nodded graciously, her eyes glistening. Carolyn stood awkwardly next to Melissa, who looked like she might bolt at any moment. Then Carolyn leaned toward Grandma and hissed, "I can't believe you didn't tell us. All this time, all these years." Grandma looked her in the eye and said, "I would have if you ever asked. But you only ever saw what you wanted to see." A poor widow in an old house. You never saw me. My mother turned pale. Dana looked from one to the other, then excused herself to address another guest. My father murmured something and walked away. Melissa muttered, "I need air," and disappeared. I turned to Grandma and asked, "Are you okay?" She smiled. Better than okay? That felt like peace. We sat quietly as the luncheon continued. No more drama. No more pretending. The truth had been spoken, and there was no going back. Outside the estate, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows on the grass. As we drove away, I reached over and held Grandma's hand. She squeezed it back gently and whispered, "Thank you for bringing me Becca. You didn't just open a door today. You opened a new chapter." And I believed her. The past had just been rewritten, not with shame, but with pride. The fallout began almost immediately after the luncheon ended. By the time we reached home, Grandma's phone had already rung twice, and my inbox was flooded with unread messages. The next morning, a local business blog published a short but punchy article titled "The Hidden Investor Who Built Summit Capital," featuring photos of Grandma smiling next to Dana Lefevre and a short quote from Dana praising her integrity and early support. But the detail that caused the most stir was the family connection. One sentence stood out. The mother of high-profile realtor Carolyn Miles turns out to be one of the earliest and most private investors in California's real estate boom. The article went viral in our community. Then the headlines began to spread. Talk shows debated it. Commenters praised Grandma for her humility while questioning how a successful family could sideline such a woman. The hashtag rustic widow began trending, ironically used by thousands defending elder respect and calling out generational hypocrisy. My phone rang again and again. First my father, then Melissa, then my mother. I ignored them, but when Grandma's phone rang and she saw the name Carolyn flashing across the screen, she answered. "Hello, Carolyn," she said calmly. Her voice had no edge, only stillness. "You made us look like fools," my mother snapped. "You humiliated us in front of everyone," Grandma replied gently. "I didn't say a word that wasn't true. You're the one who decided I wasn't worth inviting," my mother hissed. That was before I knew. If I had known, maybe things would have been different. "That's the problem," Grandma said. "You should have cared even when you didn't know. That's what love is." I watched from across the room, my fists clenched. Grandma hung up quietly and turned to me. "She's not angry about the truth. She's angry people saw it." A day later, a formal email arrived. It was from Melissa's wedding coordinator announcing that due to scheduling conflicts, the wedding was being rescheduled. I laughed without humor. It wasn't about scheduling, it was about saving face. Grandma smiled knowingly. "Let them rearrange their image. We have work to do." That same week, Grandma and I began discussing something new, a foundation, one that would invest in housing support for widows and elderly women in rural communities. We named it the Quiet Foundation. Dana offered to partner with us, providing business support and financial infrastructure. Becca Grandma said as we worked on the proposal, "You have a voice that people respect. Use it. Make sure no one else is left alone the way I was." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. We created a mission statement, wrote our first grant letter, and scheduled our first local outreach meeting in Mendocino. I poured every skill I had into it. My engineering background helped us design safe housing models. Grandma used her decades of investment wisdom to manage the budget. We became a team. At night, we sat on the porch reviewing applications and sipping mint tea. Occasionally, the phone rang. Apologies, half-baked attempts from family members to re-enter the conversation. We didn't respond. They had made their choices, and so had we. As the weeks passed, the noise faded, but the sense of purpose only deepened. I had never seen Grandma more alive. She was no longer the forgotten matriarch in a quiet farmhouse. She was a leader, a visionary, and my inspiration. One morning, while pruning rose bushes, she looked at me and said softly, "I always believed the truth would find its way home." And now, it has. I reached out and held her hand, and I promise it'll stay home this time. The wind shifted, the sun rose higher, and a new life had begun. Summer drifted into fall, and with it came the next phase of our lives. I submitted my formal resignation to my firm in Eugene, thanking them for their support, but knowing in my heart I would not return. My work was no longer about highways and zoning ordinances. It was about people, about giving women like Grandma the space and dignity they deserved. Dana offered me a part-time consulting role within Summit Capital to help identify rural development opportunities, and I accepted with gratitude. I spent mornings walking parcels of land near Mendocino, taking photos and sending notes to Dana's team. In the afternoons, I sat at the kitchen table with Grandma, sorting through letters from women applying for grants. Some wrote from broken-down trailers, others from nursing homes where they felt invisible. Every story reminded me of what could happen when love is replaced with convenience. One evening, Dana visited us in person. She brought a bottle of Merlot and a box of lemon pastries and wore jeans instead of her usual suits. We sat on the porch with Grandma as the sun bled orange over the fields. Dana listened as Grandma told stories of how she once fixed a leaking roof herself with a hammer rope and blind determination. "You should have your own book," Dana said. Grandma chuckled. "I prefer planting seeds that grow quietly." After dinner, we sat in the garden with string lights overhead swaying in the breeze. Dana turned to me and said softly, "You've changed, not just because of the job, because you found something real." I looked at her, not answering right away. I felt something shift in that moment, something I hadn't expected. Not romance, not yet, but connection. A mutual reverence for the same kind of strength. We worked together more closely in the weeks that followed. Dana began introducing me to partners and city planners as the lead liaison for the Quiet Foundation. Her trust in me grew, and with it my confidence. I started to dream of what more we could build. Safe housing centers, financial literacy programs, counseling spaces for women pushed to the margins. Grandma watched all of this with quiet pride. One night after Dana left, she pulled me aside and said, "She respects you, Becca, not because of who your family is, but because of who you chose to be." I smiled. "Grandma, you're the one who showed me how." "No." She shook her head. "I showed you the roots." "But you decided to bloom." That fall, we held our first official fundraiser. It wasn't lavish. It was a barn gathering with wooden tables, mason jar candles, and homemade soup. But people came. Neighbors, retirees, even a few young couples who had read about us in the paper. We raised enough to fund 3 full projects. After the event, Grandma stood in the center of the barn looking at the people laughing, dancing, clapping in rhythm, and whispered, "This is the family I always dreamed of." I walked over and hugged her tightly. "And you built it, not through blood, but through grace." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt more fulfilled than I ever had during my corporate years. And somehow I knew this was only the beginning. A beginning built not on inheritance or expectation, but on truth and love. And above all, on the wisdom of a woman once called a burden who turned out to be the foundation itself. Winter came early that year, with wind sweeping through the hills and a thin layer of frost painting the fields each morning. But inside our farmhouse, the hearth was always lit, and warmth radiated from more than just firewood. Grandma's birthday approached her 77th, and I decided to plan something different. Not a surprise party, not a grand gesture, but a quiet celebration with meaning. I reached out to Dana and a few of our foundation partners and invited them to a small lunch at the farmhouse. I told Grandma only that we were expecting company. She didn't ask much, simply smiled and made her signature cornbread and stew. That morning, I arranged wildflowers from the garden into a vase and set the table with linen napkins she had kept since I was little. At noon, the cars arrived. Dana came first, holding a bouquet and a thick envelope. Then came June, a retired teacher from a nearby town who was one of our first grant recipients. After her came Ella and Maria, who had started a small bakery together after moving into one of our renovated homes. Grandma greeted each guest as if they were long-lost family, her eyes soft with joy. After lunch, I stood and tapped my glass gently. "Thank you for coming today to honor a woman who taught me everything without ever raising her voice. Esther Miles is more than my grandmother. She is the architect of everything we're doing now. She showed me that silence is not weakness and that humility does not mean invisibility." The room was quiet, save for the soft crackle of the fire. Then Dana stood and said, I have something for you, Esther. She handed Grandma the envelope. Inside was a deed to a plot of land in Mendocino registered jointly to Grandma and me. This is where your first housing center will be built, Dana said. In your name. Tears welled in Grandma's eyes. I've never wanted my name on a building. Dana smiled, then let it be on every smile that walks through its door. We toasted with cider, and for a moment, time paused. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, but inside, there was only peace. That evening, as the guests departed and the farmhouse quieted again, Grandma pulled a small box from a drawer. She handed it to me. Inside was a set of old brass keys. These belong to a house I bought 20 years ago, she said. It's yours now. I stared at the keys, stunned. Why didn't you ever tell me? She touched my hand. Because I was waiting to see who you'd become. Now I know. I hugged her tightly, holding the keys between us. That night, as we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets and memories, I realized this was more than inheritance. It was passing on a legacy, not of wealth, but of choice. Of choosing to see people, to listen, to act when no one else will. As the stars emerged and the air grew colder, I looked at Grandma and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me." She smiled and replied, "Thank you for remembering who I am." And in that silence beneath the stars, I felt it, the fullness of a life reclaimed. Spring returned with quiet grace, bringing green back to the fields and soft blossoms to the trees behind the farmhouse. Life in Mendocino found a rhythm, one that felt both ancient and new. The foundation was growing steadily, and with each new letter we received from a woman helped by our work, I felt more rooted in this path. Dana and I continued working side by side, though something between us had shifted. It was no longer just professional. It was the way she lingered on the porch after meetings, the way her voice softened when she asked about my day, and the way Grandma gave us both knowing glances without saying a word. One late afternoon, Dana brought over a bottle of wine and a stack of lease agreements. We finished the paperwork quickly and lingered outside watching the sun sink behind the hills. Grandma sat in her rocking chair, humming an old tune. Dana turned to me and said, "Becca, do you think this is what you were always meant to do?" I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Not the way I expected, but yes. And I think I was meant to do it with you. She smiled and we said nothing more. That night after Dana left, Grandma called me into the living room. She held a small photo album in her lap and patted the seat beside her. I sat and we turned the pages together. There were old photos of Grandpa, of Mom as a girl, of me as a toddler sitting on Grandma's lap wearing a paper crown. "You've come far," Grandma said. "But the best part is that you didn't come alone. You brought others with you. You healed something in our family that I thought was broken forever." I shook my head. "It was you, Grandma. I just helped people finally see." She closed the album and looked out the window. "Family isn't who claims you during the good times. It's who stands beside you in the quiet moments when no one's watching. You've become that kind of person." I hugged her and whispered I learned from the best. Weeks passed and Melissa's wedding quietly took place at a smaller venue far from headlines. We weren't invited. Grandma didn't seem surprised. We sat in the garden that day planting basil and lavender, while laughter echoed from the distant hills. Neither of us looked back. The following month we held the opening ceremony for the Esther Miles Housing Center. A modest building painted soft blue with a wraparound porch and a garden in front. The mayor came. Dana gave a speech. I stood beside Grandma as she cut the ribbon, her hands steady, her eyes shining. Reporters took photos and asked questions, but Grandma simply said, "I built this for women who were told they had no voice. Now they have a place to be heard." That night, as the guests left and the sky turned violet, I looked around the empty garden chairs and felt something shift inside me. Not sadness, closure. I walked Grandma to the car and she paused at the door. "Do you feel it?" she asked. I nodded. "It's finished." She smiled. "No, dear. It's just begun." And she was right, because that story would live in every woman who walked through those doors, every hand we held, every voice we helped rise. And though our past could not be rewritten, the future was ours to shape. I held Grandma's hand all the way home under the soft canopy of stars and whispered the promise I had once made silently, but now said aloud, "I will never let you be forgotten again." She squeezed my hand and whispered, "I was never forgotten, Becca. Not while you remembered." And with that, we stepped into the house where firelight danced across wooden walls and the scent of cornbread drifted from the oven and everything we had once lost had found its way home.